I was incredibly moved by the script. I feel like on the one hand, we've seen aspects of this story before in terms of the occupation, the German occupation of France, and also the impact that can have on communities for decades to come. But there's something about the impact it has on these individuals and the choices that they make and the degree of compassion and kindness that they extend to each other, and at the risk of their own lives. Vivian she's essentially a rural housewife and mother in a small town on the outskirts of Paris in France, and I've imagined that she works the land around their house, and they use the food that they grow, and she possibly sells the surplus in the town market, and they have a very small, loving family life at home. Her husband, Jean-Paul, works in the sewers, and I have to imagine that given the impact that illness has on a family, when Julian contracted polio when he was very young, the impact that would have had on the family, both devastating for them financially, has continued to affect them for years to come. You've gone from living in a perfectly comfortable, quiet, small village to suddenly having aggressive strangers who speak another language taking over, and people were killed with impunity, and you didn't know how to trust anymore. You didn't know whether you could trust your neighbors anymore, whether they were sympathizing with the Germans or whether they were sympathizing with the resistance, and so life changed very profoundly, very quickly for France, but especially some of these small rural towns, and so making the choice to shelter Sarah, who is Jewish and was meant to be put on a train to head to a concentration camp. The fact that they're sheltering her means that they would all be killed, without question. And so it's not just a matter of they'd be fined or their hands would be slapped or they'd be reprimanded in some way. They would absolutely have been murdered. And so it's a very big and consequential choice that they're taking on. I would say that it's a story about two families in a small town in German-occupied France during World War II, and that a non-Jewish family chooses to shelter a young Jewish girl who's been separated from her parents, and we witness the impact that choice has on everybody, and the risk that they take in doing so, and yet we see very clearly that it's they feel themselves that they have no choice, they don't think twice about it.
Obviously, for any performance, the look is very, very important, to find the right look. So we were lucky. I think we got the look very quickly, and that was very important. Sometimes you can't quite find it, and even when you start shooting, you haven't really found it. But with this one, we found it very quickly, and Mark is very sensitive, very observant, and I feel if he says yes, that's right. I feel he knows what he's talking about, and if he said, I think we need to work on this or that, so I get the sense that he would be right about that. So it's great to be in the hands of someone that you respect on that level, that you absolutely can, take their guidance. Gillian plays my grandson, and he's a young teenager, and as many young teenagers do, he's going through a difficult time when he can't quite find his place in the world, and he's lashing out as a reaction to that. Grand-mère, who has his grandmother, who has had this extraordinary history in her life of what happened to her when she was his age, is trying to make him understand that the world is, of course, is a complicated place with darkness, but as Martin Luther King says, you have to find the light within yourself. Darkness will never drive out darkness. So, that is the lesson that she is trying to teach him, simply through telling him her life story. Well, I was born after the end of the Second World War, but I grew up in post-war Britain. And so the stories and the reality of what happened during the Second World War was very much a part of my youthful education, if you like. And I've always felt very strongly it was such an unbelievably traumatic event for the world, for Europe in particular, but all over the world, for many nations lost millions and millions of people. The Holocaust was one of the most monstrous occurrences in human history. I felt it. I still feel it's so important that we don't forget about it, and that the young are not taught about it, but should be aware of it, and aware of the kind of sacrifices that people made, the kind of tragedy that people confronted, the kind of cruelty, where when you perpetuate racism of any kind, the end of that road is what happened in the Second World War. So I just feel very strongly that we have to keep it alive in our mind. Well, I play she's called Grand-mère, grandmother. I think it's the first time in my life I've ever played a grandmother. So all good things to come to people who wait, But she's a wonderful person who's become a very successful artist. She, of course, is the younger Sarah, is the protagonist of the movie. The movie is about her, but we see her as well as seeing her as a young person. We see her now towards the end of her life. Again, that's something that we all, especially when we're young, and we all do it, we kind of forget that older people have been young once and have had experiences in a different way at a different time, but similar experiences to the ones that we are having as young people. It's in the nature of youth to say, it's my turn now. Now I take the world. You're letting go of the world. I'm taking hold of the world, and that's a very natural thing to do, but it's good to be reminded that older people do have a history were young once, and sometimes went through exactly what you're going through, sometimes went through something completely different. I mean, you know, Gillian obviously has a lesson to learn. Hopefully in the audience there'll be a lot of other kids thinking about their own behavior, their own actions, their own, you know, cruelty maybe that they have participated in, and realize how, you know, how terribly, terribly wrong it is, and how the end of that journey can, you know, it can be so devastating, so extreme. So I do hope that this is a lesson that people will learn, and also the lesson of great courage, you know, the great courage of the families who hid people. I was reading fairly recently, it was just after I'd sort of committed to doing this film, and I happened to read an article about a whole village, a French village. The whole village had hidden people. Every single person in that village had hidden people, whether they were escaping, you know, pilots or airmen who'd fallen into France, or Jewish people, but the whole village were involved in hiding people, and the incredible courage that needed, because they would have been executed, every one of them, if this had been found out. You know, that's a courage that it's very hard to comprehend nowadays, isn't it, as we get further and further away from it. So yes, to learn about courage and to learn about kindness.
I was incredibly nervous when I first met Mark, because I'd been at home with my sisters, and we decided that we were going to go through and we were going to watch as many of Mark's movies that we hadn't seen already as we could. And so that just made me really scared, because I then turned up on set kind of having watched these amazing movies which I loved, like the Finding Neverland and The Kite Runner, and just thinking, oh my God, he's such an incredible director and I'm going to get to work with him. But he's just he's the loveliest, he's totally down to earth and so friendly, kind of so quickly. And we have a laugh together all the time on set, and I go and watch the kind of the playback of all the shots in his tent with him, with Renee, the producer, and with Matthias, the DOP. And it's just been so lovely. He's just so kind of, also just really generous in terms of, you know, the acting. So I'll turn up in the morning and I'll say, you know, well, what do you think for this scene? Because maybe the stage direction will say, kind of, Sarah cries, and I'll say, well, do you think that she would? And he says, well, it's up to you, it's your character, you know. He'll give a direction, but then he'll say, well, ultimately, you know, you have to feel what's right for you, which has just been so lovely. And then it's really interesting, because I feel like after a while I've really got a sense of like almost like what he's going to say after a take. And so, you know, I'll do a take and then I just know that he'll come in and I'll kind of look up and be like, I need to be less emotional on that bit. And he'd be like, exactly. And we've got it like almost like a really good routine. And he's really concise in the way that he says things. He's got an incredible way of kind of, if I'm confused about how a line should be said, he just goes, well, it's just said like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. That's completely right. And it's incredibly helpful. And he's just such a nice and funny guy at the same time. So Orlando, I'm wondering what he said about me now, but wait. Anyway, Orlando he's from Melbourne. He's my age, and he plays Julian. And I think it's been really interesting, because very quickly we became very close friends, because like I said, we were living together kind of in the hotel or by apartments right next door to each other through the rehearsal period as well. So we very quickly became very close with each other. And I mean, it's interesting because he's done a lot more work than I have. And what I noticed really quickly, he's incredibly kind of focused, and he always, you know, he did so much kind of, he's thought so deeply about his character, and he knows exactly about Julian. You can ask him any question about Julian and he'll answer immediately, which I think is great. And he's been kind of such an inspiration to watch, really, and to perform with, because he's got this sort of he's incredibly kind of graceful, and which just sounds weird, but all his movements are so kind of poised and just so thought out. And he's been a real inspiration. He's got such a kind of, he knows exactly what he's doing. He's got such a sort of method for how he performs and how he thinks about the character. Sarah is, I think in the script she's described as slightly spoiled at the beginning of the film. And she's very kind, she's got her close group of friends, and I think she's a very kind of normal girl. You know, she goes to the cinema, she does all these things, but sort of hidden in it there's this boy, Gillian, who she's sat next to for 5 years, I think, and she's never actually learned his real name because everybody calls him Torteau. So it's this, she lives this sort of quite sheltered life, and you know, she doesn't know about all the horrors that are taking place in the rest of France because she lives in the unoccupied area of the free zone in France, and her parents kind of shelter her from really what's going on in the rest of the world. And then later in the story, we think of it kind of as a coming-of-age story because it goes over 2 years. She gets 2 years older. Gillian Anderson plays Vivian, and I think, I was there on her first shooting day, which was actually coincidentally the last scene that we're in together. But I mean, throughout the process, it's just been such an honor to work with. Gillian Anderson, who is just the most incredible actress, and she's. We had one day where it was just us two in the barn, and we were doing the hair washing scenes, and it was just so incredible to talk to her, and the way she works is so interesting as well. She's got a incredible eye for when her performance is looking good. So she, after every take, she sort of goes, yeah, that was good, right? That was good. And Mark kind of goes in and, of course that was good. But she'll go, no, I think we should do another one. We should do this. And it's been just so incredible. And I got to sort of ask her, because I've got no experience basically, and she's got so much experience. And I got to sort of say, well, how do you think, how can I make this look natural by doing this? And she just gave me some incredible advice kind of on a small level, sort of things like you have just really tiny pieces of really useful information, like in eating scenes you have to kind of angle your hand so it doesn't look weird and so you don't spill stuff down your front, and just these really tiny but just incredibly helpful pieces of information that she's picked up over her amazing career. And it's just been such an honor and a pleasure to meet her and work with her.
I think this story is very important for young people to watch, as well as I think it's really important for everybody to watch, because there is a timeless quality to it where it teaches so many lessons that are really important in many situations. There's always gonna be a need for kindness, and there's always gonna be a need for somebody to be selfless and to help people through what they're going through, and I think that's really important for everybody to take away from it. What really interested me about this film and made me want to come back to this world is probably just being able to play Julian again. Whenever I played him in the first one, we put a lot of depth into that character, and it was really cool to kind of show the audience the things that we were thinking about, of the behind the scenes of this character and kind of how he's grown up, because he's grown up in a family of means, and just to see his growth is one of the main things that interested me about this role. Whenever we're doing rehearsals, she has helped me so much. There's just certain parts that I don't go as deep as she does, and then she's like, well, why don't we try it this way, in a way that you can portray this emotion, and maybe if you look off this way, and just these different not notes, because it was a very collaborative experience, but just talking about the different ways that I could do something in order to make it more impactful. That's what she really thinks about. Each line, each thing that she says has a deeper meaning behind it, and she kind of taught me different ways of implementing that into my acting, which is very useful. When I first got onto the set, I'm wanting to be a director so bad in the future. So being able to watch somebody like Mark, who's worked on so many different films that I love, is like insane. So just watching how he puts everything together and how everybody like loves his work so much, they all really want to be a part of that. Whenever I was doing Julian the first time, it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna really get into this and like go into the depths of Julian. But now, as he gets older, you can kind of take a step back and really try to give the character more life and make him feel like he has his own issues. And being able to work on that with Mark, he has so much knowledge of characters, so he really helped me put it together.
So I play Max. Max is a doctor, he's a father, he's a family man, and we have a very loving family. I'm married to Rose, I'm father to Sarah. We're French and we're Jewish. Well, Ariella is just, it is insane what an amazing actress she is, processing this complex part and breaking it down in such a brilliant way. She is so transparent emotionally. You see everything that's going on inside her. And I really felt that she's a wonderful actress to work with, a partner. I think she understands the character so deeply, with so much wisdom, and yet innocence, and she brings this freshness to the acting, to the story. I think she's absolutely amazing. I think it's an incredible journey because we meet, the film, we start seeing Sarah when she's a grandma, but then we jump back and we see a most sweetest 6-year-old, having a picnic in the woods with her parents and growing up to be this beautiful, smart, funny, loving teenager, living the life of a teenager with, starting to feel, having romances and then so quickly everything around her changes so drastically and the world collapses and she has to shift very, very quickly into survival mode, and it's just very interesting and moving to see how Sarah does this.
Julian in the story very much at the beginning, Tortue sort of hides himself behind this little bang he has, and the hair looks very textured and natural. But as he progresses his journey and becomes more confident in his love for Sarah in the barn, we kind of morphed his look into something a little bit more confident, like the character has combed his own hair and pushed it back, and we can see his face more. So I've loved developing that. Very much we emphasise, and this again is a great collaboration with Mark and with the actors involved, in that in the early days of Sarah, we try to pick up very much that she's been cared for by Rose. When you see her go to school, she is very, very put together. Her hair looks very lovely, of the period. You can tell there's a mother's touch on the hair. She looks very groomed. She has little bows in her hair, and very much we talk about this whole process that Rose has been at home and looked after a little girl. When we enter the barn, we talked at length about the character losing sight of time altogether, really, because the character's been in the barn for a couple of years, and we talked about little things that Sarah would do to her hair, that out of the materials that she has no mirrors, no vanity, so there's a lot of guesswork that's going on, and we wanted to create some hairstyles that were very simple, that Ariella could, the actress playing Sarah at this point, can do herself. I love the process of prep. I love researching. I have a lot of books and things at home that I like, art galleries and pictures and reading. When I read a script, I read it straight through first of all, then I read it again, and then I also read the graphic novel on this to see if there's other suggestions or ideas that can bounce. And then I look at a lot of pictures and I start picturing the characters, and I put together a little bit of a mood board. So I collect pictures of characters that I know are going to age, like, for example, Sarah significantly max ages quite a bit in the film, as do some of the other players and stuff. So, and other day players, people like the Lafleurs, I kind of thought about them in a slightly earlier period to the 40s, because of course older characters are never quite in the modern period of time. Then of course we have all the modern sections. So I just put about a book of each character with ideas that were purely from my heart and from my feelings of reading the script, and just ideas to bounce about, because it's such a collaboration with hair and makeup.
Helen and Gillian, they both came on and just, they were the role. Like, there really wasn't a casting process. They read and knew that they wanted to do this project. I think both of them wanted to work with Mark, and they just came and filled these roles beyond our wildest imagination. Both Ariella and Orlando are just extraordinary. This casting process was a little bit different than the norm because of having to do everything remote, but they did get to, eventually read together, and there was just such an immediate chemistry. Their process, each actor has a little bit of a different kind of process of how they kind of inhabit a character, and we felt like that was a great combination of energies. They both had a little bit of not an opposite, but a different way, and that energy together created an electricity. And they both are so extraordinary. They have long, long careers ahead of them, both Mark and I believe. Some of the early talks that we had about this story were, how do you land character? Everything is really about character. It's about how do you create a space like this theater, where a character then can inhabit that space. How does that space speak to the theater? How does the space of a theater, for example, speak to character? How do the costumes speak to character? How does the way that we shoot this and frame it and conceive of it all speak to character? So Matthias and Jennifer and Jen and Mark and myself all had very early conversations about how would the texture and the look and the feel of this story be serviced by their work in order to illuminate character. Mark, my partner, is, I think, absolutely the perfect director for this film because he's so empathetic. There's a quiet stillness about him as a human being, but he's watching and he's listening and he's observing. And how he takes that and translates that into moving image and allows these still spaces for a story to unfold and trust those spaces is something that this story needed, because as you know, it's a graphic novel to begin with, and taking it from that medium, which is beautiful, and then translating it into a space where the pictures are actually moving, related to each other and alive, is something that Mark just naturally understands how to do.
It's been really lovely to work with Mark on this film. We've had some great discussions about the way we want Julian to be physically. We talked about how many crutches we would have, because in the graphic novel Julian has 2 crutches, but we decided on 1 crutch for the film because it's easier for me to maneuver around on, and also I have a free hand to hold stuff, which is quite helpful, especially for holding the sketchbook and other things. And what we both really liked was when I turned in my left foot, it apparently it added like a really sense of realisticness to the fact that I have polio, which I can't tell from where I stand, but apparently it looks really great for the camera. So it's been really great to talk with him about developing this character. She's so professional on set, which just really brings me into the scene, and I forget that that there's a camera over there and that I'm acting. I just feel like I'm absolutely in the scene with her, which is great. Well, it's been really great because we haven't been able to have much contact with other people outside of our own age because, well, we're in Prague, we don't know anyone, and also because of COVID, we can't really explore that much. I feel like we've fast-tracked our relationship. It feels like we've known each other for much longer than the couple of months that we actually have, which is really helpful for scenes because I feel so comfortable working with her. I play Gillian, who is a French teenager in Nazi-occupied France in World War II, and he has polio, which makes him bullied. He's ostracized by his peers because they only see him for his polio, his disability. And so at the start of the film, he's shy, he's awkward, he doesn't talk much, but he really likes Sarah. And so when he gets an opportunity to save her, that's when he really develops as a person and sort of comes out of his shell.
I play Rose Bloom, who is Sarah's mother and who's married to Max, and they're a very happy family at the beginning when we meet them, and then we see them, and they're also they're quite comfortable. They're middle class family. They're doing really well for themselves, and they are very happy and quite comfortable. And then you see the situation becoming worse and worse in France, and I think Rose is really struggling with admitting to herself what's going on and what they need to do, and I think that's what I really, I don't know, just really felt for that character, and in that situation, sort of knowing that you should go, but just not being able to, just kind of not being able to admit to yourself that you know what's going on. The costumes and the hair and makeup just really, I mean, it just really helps, of course, and it's quite cute because everyone has a feeling of like, oh, I look like my grandmother, or like I look like my grandfather, and it's quite nice because, you know, it's still like, I think for us, you know, we all have, we've been talking about this with Joe, who plays Jean-Paul, and Ishai, who plays Max. You know, we all have stories of our grandparents during the war and what they had to do, and, you know, did they have to run away, or, you know, what they did. And I think it still feels very much like stories that are close to us, I think. Sarah is, so Sarah's the little girl whose story it's all about, and you meet her when she's tiny and with her parents, and then you see her for most of the film when she's a teenager, and first before, I mean, it's already Vichy France, but she's still kind of, it's just all brewing, until she then has to hide in the farm of Jean-Paul and Vivian, and I think she's such a lovely character, and she's played by Ariella Glaser, who's just a wonderful actor and just a delightful person. She's got that kind of spark, because I think what makes the character really, what makes, you know, the audience really want to see what's happening to her is that she's so kind of, yeah, she's sparky and she's imaginative and she's creative and she's intelligent and she's kind of, she's also a regular teenage girl, you know, and I think that also, I remember reading in the forewords to the graphic novel that Anne Frank's diary was an inspiration for the story, and then I listened to the audiobook of the book. Obviously, I'd read the book when I was younger, but I was like, there is a lot of similarities where it's just a young girl living her life, and there's people she, you know, this guy she fancies, and, you know, these shoes she likes, and then how history happens to her
Jennifer Williams researched a lot of the barns, and one of the key elements is because you have magic realism scenes in the barns. But at the same time, you also need light to light the barn, because a lot of scenes are at night. So ultimately, you have to make sure that the light can come from outside into the barn because you have no electricity. But at the same time, you also need to project a movie and the magic realism scene inside the barn. So some part of the barn has to be in stone and some part has to be in wood. So ultimately it's a combination of both, and really designing the barn and figuring out how to light it, how to bring the magic realism scenes to life, and how to combine it all that it also feels warm enough, because you can't have the barn too open, but then because of she lives in it, but at the same time it's a combination of it all, and you have to sort of find a balance. Ultimately, every creative process starts with the visualization of the written material and the characterizations of the characters, and ultimately the characters jump off the page, and you visualize them through obviously location and a color palette, and the color palette here is you have present day and the past, and you want to make sure the present day and the past are connected, emotionally connected, and that emotional connection between present and past is really key here, because you have Julian in the present day and then Julian in the past, and ultimately the Julian in the past connects you in the redemptive way, in the transformative storytelling to Julian in the present, and that it really has to hit and land to affect the audience, and that's is one of the key things one has to focus on.
Well, I think one of the things I love is, we're both storytellers and we're both writers and directors. Mark has an extraordinary career, and it's really fun to be able to hold a space together where a story, which is such an ethereal thing, can come and land in this safe space. And sometimes when two people hold the energy of that space, it gives it this solid foundation. And one of the things I love about working with you is holding that foundation and watching the magic of it assemble into a physical thing.
What is very good, if you have a mirror to yourself, it's always it's very productive, because ultimately the mirror doesn't lie. So ultimately, if you have that, it always provokes new answers and a new thought process, and makes you a better artist than you would be if you don't have that mirror. So ultimately, that's in that partnership is the mirror that ultimately amplifies you to become better than when you would work on just without that. As Sarah cannot leave the barn, the only way she can leave the barn is through her imagination. And Sarah is an artist, she draws, she has a wild imagination, and through her imagination we go into the magic realism. Through her point of view, we walk into the magic realism, and she ultimately brings Julian into that magic realism. So Sarah invites Julian for a nice ride into Paris, and he finds it ridiculous. But slowly, because of her passion and her belief, she makes him believe into the transformation, and believe that it's the first time he sees Paris, and Paris comes to life. We were looking who would have the right chemistry, because it's a love story. You want to make sure that your leads have the right chemistry to portray this love story, because what you want is its first love. You want the audience to fall in love with them. You want to go and transport them back to your first love. You want to experience this love, and you want to have actors who will be able to bring that love to life and make it believable. What's incredible about the two is because this movie is told out of the point of view of Julian from Wonder, who was the bully, and the bully ultimately in this film has the possibility for redemption and goes through a redemptive act of transformation and comes out the other end. Bullying is such a theme in the world today, but it's also that we all have this possibility to redeem ourselves. And that redemptive quality, I think we all have. Basically, the movie starts with Sarah as a grandmother
telling her story of her childhood and how she ultimately survived. And it's a story of her survival, and it's a story of what ultimately made her who she is today. And it's very emotional, but also very inspiring. And truthfully, as a planet, we understand what it means to be under lockdown now, after this experience of the last year. And it is really something which, when I read the script during the first phase of COVID, and it really got to me, because it's the first time that I really understood emotionally what it means to not be able to leave a place.
So when I get the script, and I've heard what the director's vision is of the script, because often they have a very clear way they want to do it, I start, just in a very basic way, making lists of each character and what their needs might be. I'm very often after a budget quite early on, so I need to kind of do a fairly good list of what everyone's needs are, whether there's stunts involved, whether they get wet, whether they ride horses, jump through windows, whatever. And then at the same time, I'm probably intrigued enough to start researching the look, and this was 1940s rural France, which, I have a vague idea about, but I wanted to be more specific. I'm putting all those things together, and the more I go through the script, pulling each character, the more I get to know the script. And then I will probably start either in a costume house, if it's something like this film. The stock exists, and you're better with old clothes because they've got life already. There's no point in making things and then having to age them if stuff exists. Now, at some point of that process, Mark sent me, he was doing location scouting here in Prague, and he sent me photos of locations, so I knew the sort of sense of where we were and the type of landscape and what the school was going to look like in that wonderful castle. And so you just... Slowly, it all becomes, if I dare say it, obvious what people should look like. I wanted to show the brace, so I did put him in shorts, and then at the beginning, and they're always so mean to him, and he's got this little balaclava, and there's just something that's so sad, and obviously it's really cold, and gosh, it was cold where we were shooting. So he's got this little balaclava, and then his coat with a belt round it, and shorts. And then a very European thing to do is you put tights under the shorts and then socks, so that sort of gives it a warmth, but still he's in shorts. And then the brace, because I really wanted to see the brace, but in the end we put the brace over the trousers when we put him into longer trousers. But as he sort of grows up and grows more confident, he looks a bit cooler. So it's not a lot. He gets long trousers. He wears his shirt a little more open, and they're a bit paler, the later shirts. And he has a little jacket, dresses, pinafore dresses, skirts with straps. That was something I always remember, so it didn't fall down, because at that age you don't have a waist. And little blouses, and I keep a little bit of red coming. Mark thought, and apparently the writer thought, a little bit of red. It's not in every single costume, and we're trying to make it not too obvious, but a little bit of red is in the fabric or in her accessories. But basically, she's just a very nice middle-class girl. She has nice socks and sandals until she gets the red shoes. Doesn't like her winter boots because she thinks they're clumpy. She runs away literally in her school pinafore dress. She's got a sweater under the school smock. She doesn't take her coat because she's left it in the art room. Miss Petitjean gives her a scarf, which she then will keep throughout the whole barn sequence, and we see a little bit at the end when she goes to Paris.
I think it's important on so many levels, because there is, without a doubt, things are not better, things are not cured, if that makes sense, when it comes to anti-Semitism and racism today. But it's also such an important story of just basic human kindness, and that's something that Wonder did so well, because being kind isn't controversial, and telling it in these circumstances where the stakes are so much higher for these two characters, Julian and Sarah, it just feels it feels very important. I think the themes of the story have been told before, but I think the fact that they're being told in this way and I think it's very new and very exciting at the same time as being grounded in history, because pretty much everything in this story is grounded in history. It's fictional characters put in very real circumstances. Ariella and Orlando, I have a lot of love for both of those people. As someone that, I was such a fan of the story, I feel like I've got a golden ticket getting to watch both of them tell it so sensitively and do it so well. And I mean, they are very, very, very talented people, and and as people, they're just as lovely as their characters, and just getting to know them has been really lovely, because I love them very much. You find Vincent in school. He's very happy to call particularly Julian and Sarah his peers. I think he's a very aimless teenager. I think he's, it's a period piece, but I think he's a teenager that you could see in pretty much any school today. He's very sort of quiet, and he's semi-reserved, but I think he's clearly, quite popular and is maybe aware of that. And I think he's a very sort of he's a very sort of average, cool teenager that I've seen in my life. So I think that was what makes Where He Goes so shocking.